Okay, this is a review of The Ministry of Time by Kaliane Bradley. They have been very heavily marketing this book. It was Waterstone's Book of the Month. They had tables for it in all the bookstores near me. My local understock library has about 15 copies of it. They're selling it in the supermarkets. They're selling it at my local Sainsbury's, which only stocks like 10 of the most mainstream books in the country. That and a lot of dilly court novels. It's already been optioned for a TV show by the BBC. The fact that the author also works in publishing is probably a big factor in this. I presume she knows people. I decided to read it after I read a description of it as being about a time-traveling Arctic explorer. I knew it had to have something to do with the Franklin expedition, and I also thought it might have something to do with the TV show The Terror. I was correct. The Franklin expedition, if you don't know, was a British naval voyage of 2 ships who were sent to find the Northwest Passage, which is a route between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans through the Arctic, which would have been important for trade. They famously did not find it, and instead they got stranded, and the crews of the ships ended up starving and eating each other. The Terror is a TV show. It came out in 2018. It has 2 seasons. They're making a 3rd. The first is about the Franklin expedition, and it's based on a book also called The Terror, and there are some supernatural elements to it. It got fairly popular during the pandemic, and it has a relatively small but fairly intense fandom online, and some of that is spilled out into people being interested in the actual expedition. The author was in this fandom. She mentions the TV show in the afterword for the book, and also in interviews. She describes the origins of the Ministry of Time as something she was writing online to entertain friends, which I think is a kind of coy way of saying that she was writing fanfic about the TV show. So they're making this into a TV show, so it's going to be a TV show based on a book, based on a TV show based on a book, based on a real historical event. I think this is an interesting example of the current trend of fan fiction to traditionally published books. The author says she basically mixed some of the ideas she had from her online writing with an outline she was already working on for a novel. So while being fanfiction adjacent, it's not like her story was trending on TikTok and she took it down, changed the names, and published it as an original novel. And they certainly aren't advertising the book as being formally fanfic, which is a real thing that's happening with a lot of the other fanfic to traditionally published novels. It's being taken very seriously as a literary novel, despite its origins, and I think that's a good thing. There's a similar situation with another novelist, Alice Wynne, who was a former fan fiction writer who is now writing literary fiction. In fact, at the beginning of this book, there's a recommendation from her. There's a little bit of controversy around the book. There's a Spanish TV show, also called The Ministry of Time, in Spanish, obviously. And there are some plot overlaps, and some people are saying it's plagiarism. My honest reaction to this is that it does seem like a coincidence. This isn't a particularly unique premise, and it seems like a mix of common tropes. If you wanted to argue that it was plagiarizing something, you could probably make a case for Kate and Leopold. I don't think it is plagiarizing that, though. The fact that the book has the same title as the TV show actually makes me think it wasn't plagiarized even more. If you were going to steal the premise of a TV show, you wouldn't also steal the name of the TV show. You would at least attempt to cover your tracks. Okay, the book is set in near future London. The British government has discovered the secret of time travel. They use it to pull people from various points in the past and bring them to the future in order to test the effects of time travel on the body. They only pick people who are near death in order to avoid altering the past, and they call these people expats. The unnamed protagonist is a civil servant who gets a job as a bridge. She is assigned to live with one of the expats, monitor them, and help them assimilate into the modern world. The expat she is assigned is called Graham Gore, who is extracted from 1847, just before he dies on the Franklin expedition. A lot of the book is a fish-out-of-water story about Graham Gore adjusting to modern life, with hints that something nefarious is going on in the background to do with the British government and how they acquired time travel technology and what they intend to do with it. The protagonist is a British Cambodian woman. I think she's pretty complex as a character. You have these reflections on her childhood and how being the daughter of a Cambodian war refugee while also being someone who passes white affected her. You can see that she went into the civil service as a way to assimilate and feel more British. Her way of thinking, her motivations and actions, her pretty morally sketchy job, and how she rationalizes it all makes her quite sinister at points. Graham Gore, on the other hand, is uncomfortably idealized. Knowing that his character is based on an actual human being makes this both more strange and more forgivable. I understand that you don't want to commit character assassination against a real dead man, but it almost goes without saying, I don't think it would be this easy for someone with Victorian sensibilities to adapt to modern British life. If anyone was transported 180 years plus into the future, I'm sure they would have a hard time adjusting to 2200s people's beliefs. but I don't think an accurate portrayal of a Victorian man's sensibilities and politics was what this book was going for. Instead, he's portrayed as having an unrealistic ability to adapt to modern sensibilities around race and sexuality and gender. He has some cutesy comedy of errors, problems with technology and media, but it's all pretty innocuous. He retains some more passable Victorian views on romance, like ideas about courtship, but somehow none of the regressive ideas about purity and propriety, which are the basis for Victorian notions of courtship, and they would be pretty hard to disentangle from each other, I think. Granted, there are points where he does say and do offensive things, but it's kind of brushed off. Well, until the end, but we can talk about that later. Apart from Gore and the protagonist, the two other most important characters are also expats. There's Margaret, who is from 1665 and is about to die from the plague when she is taken, kidnapped, rescued, whatever your view is. She seems to adjust the most easily to the modern world. She's outgoing, she becomes very feminist, and she enjoys modern art and cinema. She's a lesbian, and there were some romantic undercurrents between some interactions between her and the protagonist. I thought it might go somewhere or be addressed, but it wasn't. She speaks in this faux early modern English that never modernizes as the book progresses. I feel like after living in modern London for an extended period of time and interacting with people, her speech would gradually change and adapt. I'm guessing that she didn't modernize and adapt because a lot of the humor of the character comes from her saying modern stuff in an old-timey way. The other expat in port is Arthur, who is taken from 1916 as he's about to die at the Battle of the Somme. He's very shy and withdrawn because he has shell shock, and he becomes best friends with Gore. The way he's characterized and the references to war poet Wilfred Owen made me think that this character just originally was Wilfred Owen, and then the author thought better of it. I hope that's not true. Fine character, but he does fall into one of my least favorite tropes, which is gay guy in straight romance who is in love with the male love interest. Weirdly prevalent. Maybe writers are trying to be more progressive because in the past this character would have been like a catty woman who's trying to steal the protagonist's man, and this is a way to show that the love interest is desirable without sexist tropes, and also show that he's accepting. But it always seems quite regressive having this gay man in unrequited tragic love with the straight man who is in a heterosexual relationship. There are a lot of other characters of varying importance to the plot. There's Adela, who's the overseer of the expat project, and another bridge character called Semelia, who you think is going to be an important character, but then she just disappears for a large chunk of the book, and then is brought back for exposition purposes at the end. There are themes of climate change, the erratic weather in London is highlighted, and there's a sense of dread and foreboding from the characters at the state of the world and the corruption of the government. But the book is predominantly a love story between the protagonist and Gore. They have a lot of, I'd say, 90s British rom-com dialogue. Honestly, a lot of dialogue in the book just feels like characters teeing up the other person to say some sort of witty retort. Here's an example of some dialogue. "You can send dioramas through the ether," he said, "and you've used it to show people at their most wretched. No one's forcing you to watch EastEnders. Any child or unmarried woman of virtue might engage the machine and be faced with lurid examples of criminal behavior. No one's making you watch Midsummer Murders either, or deformed monstrosities against the will of God. What? Sesame Street," he said. Yeah, it's quippy, it's a bit twee, lots of references to British culture, apart from Sesame Street, of course. It's not very naturalistic, which is fine. It doesn't need to be. But I also don't think it's very funny, despite what the 8 pages of reviews say at the beginning, all from people saying that it's incredibly witty. It feels a bit like people are reading an aggressively British book and kind of projecting wit onto it. I personally think the writing is very Tumblr, like 2018 Tumblr. Prose is a kind of teenage melodrama to it. Lots of declarations on the nature of love. Like there's a line that I've already seen people quoting, "The most radical thing I ever did was love him," which is pretty, but in its context in the book it doesn't really mean anything. Also another line, "Forgiveness and hope are miracles. They let you change your life. They are time travel." Also pretty, but this is the kind of thing someone would edit onto a photo set of Doctor Who in 2013. I think you can often tell with modern books what social media the author primarily uses. Most of the time it's Twitter, but in this case it's definitely Tumblr. Tumblr's actually mentioned at one point in the book. It didn't feel like the author was writing an original character, which in a way they weren't. It has a kind of self-indulgent, imagining my blorbo quality, like someone having fun writing about a character in their favourite movie. A lot of time is spent talking about what modern popular culture Graham Gore likes and how he reacts to modern things. The same way someone might have a blog imagining their favourite character doing stuff. Like, for example, I don't know what people like. Do people still like Loki? Like, imagine taking Loki to a Taylor Swift concert. Imagine Mr. Darcy coming to the future and falling in love with you. There's a section where Graham Gore rescues the protagonist from death by driving her away on a motorcycle, while wearing a really cool leather jacket. Because of real life Graham Gore's sideburn facial hair situation, in my mind he kind of looked like an Elvis impersonator when he was doing this. Also, there is a dance party scene where all the expats get drunk and dance to pop music. It's got a certain charm, but it's also pretty cringe. I feel like a lot of the praise is coming from critics who think this is original because they didn't spend enough time in their teenage years on Tumblr seeing this exact kind of writing. The kind of elephant in the room when you're talking about this book is that Graham Gore was a real person. There's actually a photograph of him at the back. Technically it's a daguerreotype, which is like an early photograph printed on silver. She described him as dashing in interviews and as strikingly attractive in the book. Okay, I'm not going to say he's unattractive, he's not unattractive, and I actually like it in romantic fiction when the characters are not described as being beautiful and their looks aren't important. I think it makes the romance less shallow. But there are a lot of descriptions in the book about how gorgeous this man is, and I kept on referring back to the picture in the back of the book and thinking, this is just some guy. Maybe make part of his appeal the fact that he looks a little bit homely. I think that's kind of nice. I also do think this is my own issue, but he is so idealized and I could never separate it from the fact that he was a real person. Like, I'm not saying you shouldn't write fictionalized versions of real people, but this felt more abstracted than your average historical TV show because the situation is so far removed from the historical context. It's not a fictionalized version of real events, it's entirely imagined, and so is his character and personality. And the fact that it's a romance between a fictionalized version of a real person and, I don't think it's controversial to say, a fictionalized version of the author, it just feels more intimate somehow. Also, he wasn't like a public figure or famous in his own time. He was just a man. I was getting the same feeling as when I see human remains in a museum, like a skull or a bog body. And I can't help but thinking, like, how would this person feel about being on display like this? Especially with the sex scenes, which get a little bit weird. I couldn't help imagining the real Graham Gore reading this over my shoulder and being like, oh dear Lord. I'm writing my own fan fiction now about how scandalized I think he'd be. Maybe he'd love it. I think what makes the romance in the Ministry of Time actually interesting is the morally grey aspects of it. The protagonist is very possessive of Gore in a way that you don't see from a lot of female characters in books. Like, their relationship is quite ethically sketchy. She's monitoring him and deliberately withholding information from him. And it is addressed in the book. It's quite subtly placed in the book and it feels like an undercurrent that's going somewhere, but it does not stay subtle. Major spoilers after this point. It's revealed later on that the character of Adela, who's the overseer of the expat project, is the protagonist from the future. In the future, the world has descended into wars and climate disasters, billions of people have died, and she has been sent back in time to kind of change history. In the future, the protagonist and Gore are key figures in the British totalitarian government. This is all interesting character development, and after what we've seen of the protagonist and the excuses she's made for the government and her compliance with unethical practices, this feels like a realistic potential future version of her. And this would be compelling stuff if it wasn't dumped in long monologues right at the end of the book. It feels like there's a rush to land all the themes and have it all mean something, and it's all addressed in monologues. The character of Semelia, who I mentioned earlier as being another bridge, who you think is going to be important but then isn't. She's one of the only people who is seemingly disturbed by the idea of these expats coming from the future and is skeptical of their ability to adapt to modern day due to their histories and biases. She pretty much disappears for a large chunk of the novel. It felt like to me like we were quietly sidelining her so we could have fun with the romance without anybody there to critique it. And then she's brought back at the end to point out the obvious problems with romancing a man from the 1800s. And it's good that this is addressed, but it's all done with about 30 pages left, and it's all delivered by, pointedly, the only black character in the book who has been majorly sidelined to this point. She honestly feels less like the voice of reason and more like the voice of potential Twitter backlash. Like the author is trying to get a jump on any criticisms by fleetingly addressing them. And it's a shame because Semelia is totally right in her criticisms of the protagonist. Like, yeah, she is making excuses for corruption and surveillance, and yeah, Graham Gore participated in colonialism, and there is a bit of Orientalism in how Gore views the protagonist. In one chapter from Gore's view, he thinks of how she looks like an Inuit woman he was once attracted to, and he has some fetishistic thoughts about her body at various points. And I'd like to say deconstructing this romance is what the book is about, and it's a lot of what the last 10% of the book is about, but everything before this has the pacing of like book one in a series, like we're taking our time. And then the last 30 pages cram in all the plot. And I'd like to say it should have been longer so we could have explored everything, or it should have been 2 books. But as much as I enjoyed aspects of this, at this point I was just like, let's wrap this up. I think I sounded pretty harsh about this book in the review, but honestly, it's alright. There's certain things that it has going for it. It's interesting, some of the writing is nice. I just don't think it was entirely thought through. And the focus on the romance detracted from whatever other themes the author wanted to address. Sorry if I sounded kind of dispassionate when I was talking about the book. This is like my 7th time recording this. Okay, I'm done.